Ladies, it's a little bit past our starting time, and if we want to finish before the afternoon is well over, we had better commence right now. I do welcome you and your guests to our Larchmont annual luncheon, Larchmont Garden Club annual luncheon. Chris Shellhammer will give us our benediction as we start the luncheon, and she will do it from her table. All righty, Chris?
Yes. Shall we bow our heads? On this festive June day, when we celebrate our 85th birthday, in this lovely room facing our beautiful Long Island Sound, we thank you, Heavenly Father, for all this beauty and bounty. We are grateful for our many friends and co-workers in Garden Club, and for the opportunity to increase our knowledge and to serve in beautifying our community and in bringing comfort to others. Teach us, Lord, to appreciate and love and tend your gifts of trees, plants, flowers, and all living things, which abound in great variety and profusion around us. Help us to conserve and preserve them. Show us how to purify our environment and to channel our natural resources for the common good and the good of all the generations to come. Amen. Amen. I personally, at this time, want to tell you how much I have enjoyed my 44 years in Garden Club. It has been wonderful knowing you all and working together. I will never forget you, and I will remember you especially every first Monday of the month when you meet each other, and I'll know that I'm there too in spirit. God bless us all.
Yes. Madam President, members and guests, I'd like to welcome you to the 85th Jubilee celebration of the Garden Club of Larchmont, which was founded in 1913 by 18 Victorian ladies. I'd like to take a moment and read their names to you. Miss Boyce, Miss Bowes, Mrs. Brinkerhoff, Mrs. Clyde Brown, Miss Bessie Cowdrey, Mrs. F.W. Flint, Miss Helena Flint, Mrs. E.F. Griffin, Mrs. S.T. Hodgman, Miss Mary Hull, Mrs. W.L. Jacoby, Mrs. A.W.H. Johnson, Miss Emily Lindsley, Mrs. Edgar Park, Mrs. W.A. Shelton, Mrs. William B. Sutherland, Mrs. James G. Wilson, and Mrs. Leslie Winship. Did you hear some familiar names there? Yes. The Flint family gave the land we call Flint Park to our community. That was the Flint family of one of our founders. We hold some of our Garden Club meetings in the Lindsley Room of the Larchmont Avenue Church. Mrs. E.F. Griffin is the Griffin that Griffin Avenue in Scarsdale was named for. And most amazing is that our present president, Pat Flint Stroud, is related by marriage to one of our founders, Miss Helena Flint. Today we are presenting a timeline of interesting and important events in the history of our club. Each decade will be depicted by one of our past presidents and our present president. Hope you enjoy this program as much as we have enjoyed getting it together for you. Now let me introduce our moderator, Susan Kepler.
I'm going to start off with the 1910s. In the teens of this century, a lot was going on. Amundsen reached the South Pole, the Serbs and the the Albanians were fighting. What's new? And that was before World War I. World War I was from 1914 to 1918. Zippers came into fashion. Before that, we didn't have them. The Titanic made her famous voyage. Woodrow Wilson was the president. The Panama Canal and Grand Central Station all opened during the teens. The foxtrot was the hot dance. And the films of the day included Mary Pickford in The Little Princess, Birth of the Nation, Charlie Chaplin was very popular, and daylight savings time was introduced. Airmail service was established between New York, Washington, and Chicago. But here to talk about the beginnings of our garden club is our founder, Helena Flint.
Now, Emily, it's the year 1913. This is the time to start the garden club that we have been talking of. I know it might seem to you an impossible task, but we shall ask the New York Flower and Guild organization for their advice. And maybe in the long run, we will be part of their organization. Let's call our friends together now. Even though it's January, let's get them together and start planning for the spring. Now, Emily, I know that the children's garden and the children's growth in flowering is very dear to your heart. I agree with that. And I propose to give some of our holdings over there near the East Creek for the purpose of the children's gardens. But what are we going to do with the produce? That's another question. I'm sure the Gun Hill Hospital in the Bronx, the Little Sisters of the Poor in the Bronx, and the New Rochelle Hospital will be happy to have their produce. But how are we going to get it there? That's going to involve another thought. Now, Emily, 25 cents a piece is not too much. 36 children at 25 cents a piece will give us money for seeds and plants and fertilizer and a man to turn the soil. And the children will see the value of a quarter. Now time passes. In the fall of that year, Miss Flint proposes that we start not only a horticulture, but a design section. Emily and ladies, please, do you remember how grand that party was down at Miss Islin's in New Rochelle? She had a beautiful garden show. I propose that we imitate her show and make our garden not only horticulture, but design. And I'm sure that will bring more members into our group. Thank you.
If we believe the movies, gangsters were on every street corner and every alley had a speakeasy. Although the radio was an important part of the lives of the average American family, motion pictures were all the rage. The Jazz Singer was the first talkie in 1927. Coolidge and Hoover were the presidents. The 19th Amendment gave the women the right to vote. Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic Ocean, opening the way for a form of transportation that we take for granted today. But Amelia Earhart was right behind him in 1927. The League of Nations came into being. In 1922, a stock market boom began the decade, and it ended with a stock market crash. Sports figures included Jack Dempsey, Sugar Ray Robinson, Babe Ruth. Sonia Henning was the ice skating champion. Will Rogers was at the height of his career, and crossword puzzles became fashionable, and Kodak introduced the color movie film. Here to tell us what's going on in the Garden Club during the 1920s is Chris Shellhammer.
Participation in any international flower show was on March 21st, 1921, when the New York City Garden Club asked us to contribute a window box. We won the Silver Cup for the best exhibition out of 20 competitors. And that was in 1921. The chief objective of the Garden Club of Larchmont became to aid its members and those in the vicinity of Larchmont to make their gardens more beautiful and to study the finer points of gardening in its various phases. After World War I, the energy and enthusiasm that had proved so successful in raising funds for the war effort were turned toward beautifying their own homes, gardens, and community. We were now an official garden club. Our first show, which was open to the public, was held at Bonnie Heather Farm at 280 Weaver Street, now Saints John and Paul Church and Rectory. If we were to visit that show now, we would not see one as we see them today. It called for, now listen to this schedule, all it called for was one artistic arrangement of a collection of 3 to 6 varieties of foxgloves, sweet williams, delphiniums, peonies, lilies, poppies, wildflowers, and roses. And that was the garden show. That was the show. Some difference from the ones we have now. What a difference from the shows of today. The first Garden Club show was held at the Larchmont Avenue Church in June 1922. However, our monthly meetings were held at the Chatsworth Avenue Firehouse. In 1923 and 24, Miss Emily Lindsay started some civic improvement projects. Once 135 rambler roses were planted near Chatsworth Avenue. Other shrubs were added on the school grounds. In 1925, when Julia Latimer was president, the library received 250 named varieties of iris. More went to Flint Park and Memorial Park. To picture how, now listen to this is really a treat. To picture how different Larchmont was in the early years of the 20th century, we quote a report from Mrs. Edward Hubbard. This is in quotation marks. At one time, the area which is now Memorial Park was a slum section with saloons and tenement houses. Longtime residents speak of Squatter Town, a shabby section near the station. They refer to Goat Hill, now Chatsworth Gardens, because goats roamed there while women washed clothes on the banks of a spring, which is now Larchmont Circle. Visualize that? Remember, however, that Larchmont Manor was a summer colony for wealthy New Yorkers, a beautiful residential section. But it was a very limited area of less than 1 square mile. The section north of the station was not developed until later. Sweet Potato Hill is now the site of the War Memorial. It had a hotel and bar where boxing matches were held in one of the rooms. During the 20s, before Prohibition, the hotel lost money, so the town acquired the property and turned it into a park. Once again, our club made plans to beautify it. 1927 was a banner year for our club, with activities centered on the beautification of Memorial Park. Our club continued to raise money with a series of luncheons, garden tours, plant sales. The garden had a planting committee, which bought plants, shrubs, flowering trees, and weeping willows. Most of the work was done by a devoted committee. The members got down on their knees to plant and seed in the parks, and many vacant lots. They even did that. This was in 1927. One of the plantings was a community tree where carols were sung at Christmas time. As we can see, the main goal and objective of the Garden Club of Larchmont in the 20s was the beautification and maintenance of the community grounds. Other activities came later.
The Depression had a grip on the entire country. Franklin Roosevelt was president, while in Europe, political and economic instability led to the rise of Hitler. Here at home, going to the movies was a popular pastime. Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz fascinated millions of fans. Shirley Temple, Gary Cooper, Greta Garbo, Clark Gable were all movie idols of the time. Disney's first color film was in the 1930s. On Broadway, Gershwin opened Porgy and Bess and wrote many memorable tunes. This was also the era of the big bands. Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, and others had people tapping their feet. Admiral Byrd was going to the South Pole for a second time. International air travel and mail delivery began. Life magazine began publication, and nylon stockings first appeared during the 1930s. Here to tell us what the Garden Club was doing in the 30s is Ruth Ernst.
Fortunately, it is cooler today, so this doesn't seem too bad. A very useless object, but back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, it was considered an extremely fashionable fashion accessory. Years ago, a stole is considered something to wear in the spring or the fall on a cool day like today, with either a suit or a fancy dress, a dress-up dress, and along with it, you would wear either short gloves, depending upon the length of your sleeve, short gloves, medium length gloves, dressy, or elbow length.
Oh, yes.
Elbow length gloves. And one more important fashion accessory would be a very fancy evening bag, or evening wear, of course.
Bag.
Now, to get off the fashion show and into the club, the 30s were the years of the dogwood. The club bought a great many dogwood and at a special price and sold them. Can you hear me?
You gotta move closer.
Not close enough? I keep wandering. The club had bought a number of dogwood trees at a very special price and sold them to the membership, also at a very special price, which is still the reason why you see so many dogwoods around town. And this practice continued into the 40s and even beyond. The publication of Leaves, the newsletter, began in 35. Now these were the Depression years, the 30s. But the membership thrived rather surprisingly. In fact, it was up to 300 in 1933. Think of that today. Many young people were interested. In the late 20s, a group called the Juniors was organized. And they became large and split off into a side group, another group called the Sub-Debs, which were slightly older. Then they kept on going for quite a while. I don't know how long exactly. The good works of the club in Depression years included food and clothing drives for the unemployed. Do you all hear me now? Yes. Big highlight of 36, the destruction of 5,000 tent caterpillar nests with the help of the Campfire Girls. Where did they go? The first club shows began in 30. Also, we exhibited at the International Flower Show in New York. which alas is no more, where we won a number of prizes all throughout the 30s and probably beyond. Finally, the crowning glory of the 30s was an award of merit, which was won by a garden club member for a garden exhibit at the World's Fair in 1939. And that's it for the 30s. Thank you.
Dominated the news until 1945. Women joined the workforce to help with the war effort. Rosie the Riveter came to symbolize not only the patriotic efforts of women during the war years, but their ability to contribute to the economy. Women have never left the workforce. Roosevelt was president, but Truman became president in 1945. The United Nations was established, and the power of the atom was discovered, both for peaceful and military purposes. Guys and Dolls was on Broadway, and the movies continued to entertain the country. Bing Crosby in White Christmas, and John Wayne rallied the troops and Americans in numerous war stories. Other movies of note, Grapes of Wrath, Gaslight, Citizen Kane. It was the era of the zoot suit for hip cats, and the jitterbug became a popular dance. Oklahoma was also on Broadway, and Duke Ellington became well known as a jazz musician and pianist. And here to tell us what was going on in the 40s is Irma Young.
1940s, the Garden Club had a change of direction because there was reports of submarines off the coast of New York, and everyone was frightened, and the word you heard every day was help the war effort. The first thing that the Garden Club was involved in was the Red Cross, rolling bandages, collecting money, and visiting some of the wounded who returned. There were some of our young men who went to Canada and joined the Royal Air Force. They came back to veterans hospitals in New York. The next thing was war bonds. I remember that when I was working, you were expected to buy a war bond every month, every salary that you received. Of course, you could get a $25 bond for $17.50, so it wasn't terrible. And then the U.S. Treasury Department gave a citation to the Larchmont Garden Club for their effort in selling so many bonds. Followed with that was gasoline coupons. If any of you are as old as I am, you'll remember that you couldn't go anywhere because the gasoline shortage. I remember I married in 1944, and our friends gave us gasoline coupons as wedding presents so we could go on our honeymoon. My husband was a petroleum engineer, and he knew that the octane number of kerosene as well as the gasolines, so he added half kerosene to high-test gasoline in order to go, of course, to go on a honeymoon. Also, there were food stamps. You couldn't buy sugar or meat without a food stamp. As a result, there were lots of vegetables eaten, and they started victory gardens. Larchmont opened an information center for victory gardens to help the people of Larchmont know how to grow these vegetables. And practically everyone had a little garden in their backyard. The Garden Club also worked with the Larchmont board, and they planted dogwoods all around Larchmont, and they worked also with the board to eradicate ragweed as much as possible because of so many people having trouble with the pollen. The WACs who were in barracks at Fort Slocum were not ignored either. The garden club made 6 window boxes, filled them with colorful begonias, and presented them to the WACs at Fort Slocum. The children's garden club was begun at that time too. And as the war was over, there suddenly was a great need for tools in Europe. So the garden club started a campaign, Tools for Europe. And they collected lots and lots of tools, spades and hoes and trowels, as well as other tools. And one woman, a Mrs. Jewett, said, "I'll take it to Europe." So all these big cartons were taken to her stateroom on the ship, and she took them to Europe. Followed that, they had a campaign for seeds for friendship, and these were sent to Europe as well. That year, 1947, the Larchmont Garden Club received a national award for its excellent flower show. We were very proud of that. Conservation was also won a bronze medal. Larchmont was one of the early ones in having conservation programs. 1949 saw the soldiers returning, and of course they got married, so we had a new homemaker's guide, and they taught them how to select shrubs, how to plant a lawn, how to prune, and various other things. And this was very helpful. In fact, I think this is what the garden club is really for, and we should do it again. Elkin Park, some of you will remember, was built, 50 homes were built by veterans, and only veterans' families lived there. The garden club sort of adopted them and helped them with all of their gardening problems. They had a common park, which the garden club donated flowers, seeds, and helped them to plant it. These ladies, and they continued this for almost 20 years, and many of them joined the garden club. These ladies worked very hard, and of course the war had pulled us all together because we were really afraid of what might happen to this country. Thank you very much. The dress I have on is the exact pattern of the dress I wore in 1944 to apply to the superintendent of schools for my teaching job. And mine colors are also fashionable. The color was luggage tan and white, not this color. And the hat was inspired by Grace Kelly's hat in one of the 40s films. I'm hard to walk with these shoes. I'm not used to spike heels.
Pretty good. Spiky heels.
The 1950s saw Truman and Eisenhower as presidents. Under Eisenhower, our current interstate highway system was started. The Korean War was fought. And while Christian Dior was gaining influence in Paris haute couture, poodle skirts and saddle shoes were the fashion of the teenagers. Elvis Presley was swiveling his hips across the country, and televisions came into American living rooms, changing our lives forever. Uncle Milty, George Burns and Gracie Allen, The Ed Sullivan Show, I Love Lucy, Jack Benny, many programs that we all remember. And color television was introduced. The Jack Paar show debuted and eventually became The Tonight Show. On Broadway, King and I, West Side Story. The Russians launched Sputnik and our space program lifted off the ground. In the movies, Rear Window, On the Waterfront, And Marlene Dietrich created quite a stir with her man-tailored fashions. Pants on a woman, oh my. Here to tell what the Garden Club was up to, and we were up to big things, is Leslie Nong.
The 1950s were still a time of elegance. We wore dresses and hats, and we never forgot our white gloves, whether we went shopping to the A&P or lunching at Crafts. The time was when Marlene Dietrich was the star, wanting to be so very different, and started to wear men's suits, and that was the start of the more casual attire. Two ladies from our club started flower show schools in Westchester County and in Putnam County. Our club was the largest club in the East. We supplied public information on conservation, junior education and hospital services. We were teaching beginners classes and flower arranging classes to juniors as well as to everyone that was interested. And we started courses on horticulture and gave annual awards for our shows as well. Our evening department started out in members' homes, and very soon we had our meetings at the Federal Savings and Loan because they could hold more than 50 people, and our club was then that large. The international flower shows saw children exhibiting for the first time. Our club started to promote interest in our schools and scouting groups, and our members were so interested that they started to improve the landscaping at the railroad station and other parklets, and we maintained them as well. Excuse me. And then we started the flower shows in the county, and the proceeds were donated to the New York University Medical Center. And this has been going on for many, many years, and it still continued to do that. So those were the 50s.
This wasn't the past. Marlene Dietrich had the white pants. Got a striped suit.
In the 1960s, JFK became president and Jackie became first lady. The Beatles started the British invasion of popular music, and to think they were called long hairs. Today, their hairstyle would cause a second glance. The twist and the Watusi were the crazes of the young. On Broadway, we had Fiddler on the Roof, Man of La Mancha. Hemlines started to creep up and show off knees, and young girls discarded hats and gloves. Women started to wear pantsuits, and men wore leisure suits. The civil rights movement was in full swing, and women got on the bandwagon too, as the Equal Rights Amendment was being discussed and new laws barring discrimination of all kinds were being written. In sports, well, Bobby Fischer won the U.S. Chess Championship, Rod Laver won the Grand Slam of tennis, and Jack Nicklaus wins the Golf Amateur Championship. By the end of the decade, though, the term flower power did not refer to the Garden Club. Here to tell us what was going on in the Garden Club in the 60s is Mary Mariano.
We are now in the 60s. During Mrs. Lionel Mark's term of office, 1962 to 64, she removed the garden books from the president's home to a special section of the library. Also, she discontinued the September meetings because of transporting children to college. The club won a gold medal citation for a private garden entry at the International Flower Show in New York City. They also started the precedent of buying a club ticket to a flower show school. This was for a garden club member to attend to increase her knowledge and to see if she were interested to go on to become a judge. The next year, 1968, our club became federal tax exempt. Alvin Hughley made a gift of 20 fir trees to be planted at the station. 2 cemeteries on Post Road were cleaned up by Mrs. James Johnson, who is still a garden club member, her committee, and the Boy Scouts. The garden club won the Sears Roebuck Award for beautification for a section of Memorial Park. Thank you.
In the 1970s, we saw President Richard Nixon and the Watergate scandal. And then President Gerald Ford was a lousy golfer. On Broadway, things changed. We had Hair, Jesus Christ Superstar. The Sting was a very popular movie. New York, New York was a very, very popular. In the films, The French Connection, Cabaret, Godfather, Jaws, and Rocky were big ones. Jimmy Carter became president and started the peace process between the Israelis and the Arabs with the Camp David Accord. Hank Aaron hit his 714th home run, besting Babe Ruth's record. And the stock market closed at over 1,000 for the first time in 1972. In the 70s also, we experienced gasoline shortages, which inconvenienced a lot of Americans. But to tell us what was going on in the garden club in the 1970s is Laura Springelmeyer.
During the 70s, as I'm sure many of you here remember, one of the focuses of the Garden Club continued to be involvement in civic improvements in the area. In 1975, the club teamed with the Larchmont Chamber of Commerce, the Beautification Committee, and the merchants to beautify Larchmont Avenue and the Boston Post Road area with the purchase of pebble planters that we still plant today. The Garden Club planted them with coleus and begonias and presented the merchants with watering cans and instructions for watering them. Additional dogwoods were donated to Larchmont with $200 for dogwoods being designated for trees in Municipal Park. Arbor Day trees were an annual event. And in 1978, the annual scholarship for a high school senior interested in continuing studies in the environment was established, and the first scholarship was awarded. The first Holiday Magic fundraiser was held in 1976 at St. Augustine's. The event was a 2-day extravaganza with a formal cocktail party the first evening. Arts and crafts were created by members, in workshops were sold, and local merchants participated in the sales. The Garden Club also used the community event to publicize its activities. In 1977 and 78, it participated in the Larchmont Umbrella Day sidewalk sales. A display featuring floral arrangements, horticulture, and members' paintings was set up, and the club's very active junior division also participated. Many passers-by would have liked to have purchased the exhibits, which were not for sale. The 70s had opened with 8 flower shows a year and ended with 6. The February and March shows were eliminated, and members enjoyed meeting in those months in the smaller Lindsley room and focusing on the program. As the 70s ended, the club was recognizing some success in getting new exhibitors at the flower shows through a series of workshops dedicated to floral arrangement and horticultural preparation. Last but not to be forgotten, a momentous change took place in the Garden Club early in the 1970s. By executive decree, the ladies were allowed to adopt a change that had occurred in the nation in the 1960s. They dispensed with the wearing of hats and gloves.
Was president for 8 years in the 1980s, the first president to serve 2 full terms since Eisenhower in the 1950s. He was succeeded by George Bush, another one-termer. Diana Spencer married the Prince of Wales in a fairy tale wedding watched by millions. Phantom of the Opera debuted in London and on Broadway. Chorus Line became the longest-running Broadway show. The Voyager space probes sent back spectacular photographs of Saturn and Jupiter. IBM changed our world too. It launched the PC, and today there are thousands of PCs in homes. Sandra Day O'Connor became the first woman Supreme Court Justice. In film, we had Gandhi, The Big Chill, Terms of Endearment. And to tell us what was going on in the Garden Club is Mary McGee wearing a dress from a fashion designer of the time, Mary McFadden.
From QVC.
This is the 80s. Holiday Magic, our major fundraiser, which was started in '76, was still going strong in the 80s. Eventually, the fundraiser was moved to St. John and Paul's Auditorium and then later to the American Legion House at Flint Park, and for the first time, we included dinner. Our monthly leaves was shortened to the size as we know it today. At one time, our monthly flower show schedule was included in every issue of Leaves. Since, believe it or not, we used to have 9 flower shows a year, standard flower shows. Our junior section was very active and met every month at the Larchmont Avenue Church and exhibited flower arrangements and horticulture in our December and June shows. Hospital workshops were held at Burke Rehabilitation Center, and our members made 150 bedside arrangements every week. This was headed by Doris Shalif and Chris Shellhammer after Viga Goldschmidt. I don't know if there's many of you who remember her, but she moved to California. I became your president, and for the first time we shared a meeting with the Garden Club of Mamaroneck. For these past 2 years, we have held a combined standard flower show in May with Mamaroneck, and hopefully in October we will have our show with them again. We were very active in the 9th District Flower and Garden 81 Standard Flower Show, and our members won many awards. The junior section won a district citation for arranging an educational exhibit on birds. We also participated in Flower and Garden 82, 83, and 84, and all these shows were held at the White Plains County Center. In celebration of our 70th anniversary, Eileen Bassett wrote a history. Have you seen this book? Pamphlet? I'll leave it out there. And in celebration of our 75th anniversary, we held a period fashion show. And the scrapbook is on display in the other room. At the New York State meetings in Albany, which I attended as president and then as district director, the club won the following awards from the state. Hospital Service Award, the Civic Concern Award, the State Youth Award, the Unsolicited Award. This was for landscaping at St. John and Paul. The yearbook, we won the first award. And the Publicity Press book won a second place. In order to qualify for these awards, a book of evidence was compiled during the summer months by Peggy Parent and myself. These books were placed in competition and first won on the district level and then went on to the state level. When I was installed as district director, we started a 9th district flora showcase with Frank Lanning as commentator. This fundraiser involved many of our members, and the showcase continued for 10 years. Our first luncheon bridge was held in St. John and Paul's Auditorium. Subsequently, we moved our luncheon bridge to the Larchmont Avenue Church and held it along with our business meetings and programs, and it continues to this day. Each year, we offer scholarships of $500 tuition to an Audubon camp, also horticulture, landscaping, and ecology-oriented workshops, and for courses also offered at the New York Botanical Gardens. As our membership decreases in number, so did our standard flower shows. Although our membership has dwindled, we are still one of the 3 largest garden clubs in the 9th District. Thank you.
The current decade is upon us, and the history books haven't decided what the important events are yet. We all know the current president is Bill Clinton and of his problems. And the Serbs and the Albanians are at it again. Personal computers are in half the homes of America. The internet is a part of our lives and our economy. Cellular phones are commonplace. On Broadway, the phrase, "everything is old is new again," seems to apply. Revivals of popular plays such as Death of a Salesman and The Iceman Cometh are big hits. Here to talk about the Garden Club's future is our current president, Pat Flint Straub.
Ladies, it's 85 years later, and we are the oldest non-civic organization in Larchmont. We have survived many ups and downs, waiting lines for membership to drives for membership, honors and awards for garden club activities, but I mean exhibits, thank you, sorry. Honors and awards for our exhibits, and also disappointments when the exhibits fell apart or the weather interfered with the horticulture specimens. But through it all, we were a learning club, and we took it all with grace and goodwill. I saw a booklet here this afternoon with a headline saying, Larchmont Club developed a charming village, and that's referring to us. Today we're no longer working on public grounds with our knees on the ground and our feet in the soil, but we do contribute to the village and the town civic improvement committees. Peggy Perrin knows what I'm speaking of, Mary McGee. It's time and effort and thought and energy, and it proves very fruitful for all of us. So we're not as physical maybe, but we are mental, and we have the same goals. And we appreciate the people who have helped in every way, and we hope you continue to do so. Today, many folks are leaving our organization for one reason or another. So we ask you to think to join. There are many shoes to fill. And as long as there is a need for beauty in town, there is a need for the Larchmont Garden Club. Thank you. Come forward, please, ladies.
Mary?
She's the one I helped in the hospital. She does it every year. She's for the newspaper. She writes for the newspaper.
No, I mean, what is the difference?
Thank you for attending. Thank you.
Producer, Betsy Hanson. And our pianist. Don't we wish we had given him more time? Thank you very much.